everyone. It's Aaliyah Leslie at PSP Central. It sounds like our beeps have slowed down a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning for our second Learning Lab. Today we're going to continue talking about the panel cleanup and assessment tool, which, as we mentioned last time, is the first piece of the overall patient medical home, primary care home readiness and endorsement tool. So the session is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be shared after the webinar. Also has had a few of you reach out as the link for the recording from the last webinar hasn't been working this week. We're following IT, and it seems to be an issue directly with WebEx, so we're working on resolving it, and hopefully we'll have it sorted out soon, so stay tuned. I'll give you a brief overview of the agenda for today. So Dr. Bruce Hobson is with us again, and he's going to talk about the next part of those primary panel indicators in the tool. We'll take a look at some case studies, maybe talk about the approach with physicians and MOAs, what challenges you may want to share about how you've used similar tools in the past, and we'll open up discussion for those of you who have started trying out the tool with physicians and MOAs in your region. Okay, so last week, and following up on Dr. Ross's presentation a few weeks before that, we took some time to talk about the big picture for PSP and the priorities for this year. As I mentioned, GPSC has asked PSP to play a central role in ensuring that physicians have access to the resources and guidance they need in transitioning to the patient medical home and primary care home. Strategic direction represents a shift for PSP towards a targeted menu of practice support, which are focused on the new priorities in primary care. These include the tools we're working to develop with you and with the clinical advisory team, as well as the new QI-focused small group learning sessions that will be rolling out in the fall, along with the modules and the regular in-practice support that you already do. So as we move forward with the development and the rollout of these tools, I want you to remember that the panel cleanup and the panel management and these sort of EMR pieces are just one part of all the work that PSP is supporting. So it's not really the fun and exciting work that we usually do, but it's really foundational to be able to do those great QI projects with doctors. So back to the tool and what we're going to do today. So as I mentioned, the development of the tool is going to be a collaborative learning process for all of us. These biweekly learning labs will ensure that we have dedicated time for training, learning together, sharing our learnings where you use in practice, challenges you're facing in practice, burning issues, themes, and any needs you're hearing from doctors across the province. This also enables our PDSA cycle with the tools and will modify and refine them as we go along and learn more together. So we're going to focus on the rest of the primary panel cleanup indicators, which are items 5 to 11 on the tool. So this is a screenshot of what we sent out after the last webinar. That you see there's a couple of changes around the response scores and the expected prevalence. And then this is just a highlight of those 5 to 11 indicators that we're going to take a look at today. Lastly, I just want to clarify the incentivization around the tool. So specifically for this one, participating GPs and MOAs will receive one sessional when they complete all the items in the panel assessment and cleanup tool, so 1 through 24. An additional sessional payment is available when they demonstrate improved assessment scores, and the MOA time for the panel cleanup will be compensated at $20 per hour and capped at 10 hours. So the other change that I want to note is that we had said last time that we were going to test this with 5 per health authority. We're going to expand that out to 5 physicians in each division to start, but still looking at those targeted proof of concept enhanced communities first, if you have physicians in those communities who are ready to start moving forward on this. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Bruce's presentation. And Bruce, we're over to you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Can you hear me just fine?
Yes.
Okay, good. I first will just let you know that I will have to be leaving at about 9 o'clock or just before. The benefits of being in a small community is that when you go up the airport and check in and tell them that you have to be on a teleconference, they give you a nice private office to go and sit in and do your teleconference on. So there's my spiel for move to a small community if you live in a big city. Anyway, so at 9 o'clock or just before, Aaliyah will then take over the webinar again and go through the final pieces, any other questions and or case presentations. And she'll be advancing the slides as I tell her to, or ask her to click them. So if we go to the first slide, you know, what I wanted to reemphasize with everybody is that what we want to do is remember that when we're dealing with this with physicians, it's important to start with the why. So instead of going in and saying, we're going to be doing the panel cleanup for you because it's important for patient medical home, that's a what? That's a thing. And that's how we're getting there. So next slide, please. Important that you know you're doing that, resonating with them, and I just wanted to run through this again because I think it's really important. Click, please, Aaliyah. That we believe in patient health is improved through better quality of care. That's something that is a standard, and everybody can agree with you on that, that there's really no argument with it. You're right away on the same page. Next click. To get better in quality of care, it needs to have a continuous learning process. Fair enough. People can accept that as well. Next click. To do that, you need to have the ability to be able to reflect on one's practice and the work that you do. And to learn means to be able to look back at where you were, what the journey was like, and where you're at, to be able to compare the two and reflect on what the journey was like and what the outcome is. Next click. And finally, in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to document what you do and watch the changes that occur over time. There's what gets us into, okay, and how are we going to do that? And what is the product? Next click. So the starting foundational piece, and again, as I said last time, there'll be people that will want to start in other places. There'll be people that want to jump right in at the top and build the roof before they have a stable foundation or framework on the walls in the house. But what we know from the literature, we know from experience of others that have done this, that it's really important to get your patient panel up and running and have a clear idea of the people that you're working with before you can actually do the work that's necessary to have the improvements. Next slide, please. So the next question is, after we've done the why, how will we do this? And next slide. And we've already talked about, at the last webinar, about panel cleanup phase 1, identifying active patients, getting patient contact information clear, an age, gender histogram, if possible, in their EMRs. And we talked about various ways of doing that and the steps necessary, and provided you some tools, better for some EMRs than others, that would help you, instruction sheets and queries that you could use when you go into offices and do the work necessary. And that was all made available to you. Since that time, and next slide, please. Since that time, we had some conversations with some expert physicians and with vendors, and certainly for at least 2 of the EMRs, we do understand that there are going to be some more challenges that we have to work our way through before we really have something that's easier for you to use when you're going into offices. So specifically the EMRs with InterHealth, the EMR reporting and query system is such that the objective data dashboard wasn't as easy to use as intuitive, and in some cases it's been turned off since it was originally turned on in the pedo days. And the reasons for that is that apparently it's quite a resource drain, and going into an InterHealth equipped office and running a query can take quite a long time, in some cases even overnight. So it may not be something that is easily practical when you just plan an office visit, and there may be some preparation involved. So we're working with InterHealth to overcome that and see what we can do that will make it easier for you. Also with OSCAR, the query system is a little bit more complicated. There are some easy steps, and you had some paths and then some instructions to walk through. But with both InterHealth and OSCAR, equipping you with a USB stick that has some little queries on it that you could actually install and run on the USB stick may be something that will be very useful, and we're exploring that a bit more. With other EMRs, less so of a problem. Now, one of the things, and this will just be a plug for what's going to be available coming down the line, is that we know it's complicated when you're having to have a different product and a different workflow and different tools for each EMR. So coming down the line, one of the things that will be a huge use and benefit is that the Health Data Coalition will be having a user interface that you as coaches will be able to go to any office with any EMR and have the same view, the same interface, and the same way of being able to access the information and the measures that you want to look at, rather than having to know different techniques and go through different steps with each EMR. So that'll be a huge help to you, and that'll be coming and really in full swing by spring of 2017, but available for many of you to start using by later in the fall of 2016. So I just pause there to see if there's questions. Yes.
Sorry, it's Tamara. Good timing. I'm working with a fairly large InterHealth clinic, and about 10 years ago, they switched from CliniCare to InterHealth or to Profile, and they have a mass amount of active patients that haven't been seen just because of the data that's been brought over. And so I was wondering if you had any discussions or are involved in any discussions with InterHealth about batch deactivating patients. Yeah, right now, if I'm to do that, there's about 50,000 patients that I have to deactivate. They have to build a macro, and it's minimum 2 hours work for them, and that's like $300 billable service to the clinic. So.
And so that's a great question, and that is one of the things that Kelsey Gallant and I are working directly with the vendors to provide that batch feature. So for those that aren't aware of it, it means that you can go and when you get a list of patients, say anywhere from 2 to thousands of patients, you can actually apply one task or procedure to that whole list, and the computer will run that batch all at once so that you don't have to go into each individual patient, in this case, for example, and change their status from active to inactive or deceased or temporary or whatever you're going to change it to. It can be done in one fell swoop. So, Tamara, that's a great question, and yes, we're aware of that, and yes, that will be one of the things that we're working with the vendor to provide as an enhancement that we hope will be available for everybody. So that's a key example of something that the vendor needs to hear from as many users as possible for them to be reactive. So if you can get me and also to Kelsey that information, Tamara, it would be very helpful, like who you are, who the clinic is, and what the issue is. That'll add fuel to be able to help work with the vendor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
Any other questions? Concerns? Any other comments about how it went for people as they were doing this? Or if they haven't tried it yet, any concerns that you might have? And not a problem if there's silence. We'll just move on.
I have a question. It's Esther from Victoria. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Esther.
I went into an Osler clinic on Friday, and the instructions were wonderfully simple, and it was possible to work through the 4 steps really quickly. And the information was very helpful in the sense of seeing how there was such a disparity between what was completed by the different GPs. They were exceeding expectations in some areas, but consistently height, weight, and BMI and blood pressure were not recorded. So it was a really good opportunity to discuss these differences amongst the GPs. My concern was when I was going through the instructions, there were I loaded it on a USB stick, and I expected the little highlighted parts to be linked to some more information, and there was no other link to the information.
Great. So if you could send me that file, Esther, and with just a note or highlight in yellow or just some comments on what didn't work and what might have been broken, or what you had expected to have links, I'll correct that and make sure that is fixed up for you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we need to make sure that this tool or any of the tools that you use work for you and don't cause any glitches. It's like what I sometimes describe to people, that if you have a mechanic working on your car and they're fumbling around for their crescent wrench and this and that and don't know what tool and muttering and cursing that tools don't work, it doesn't make you look good. And we want to make you look as good as possible when you're doing this work. And make it as clean and simple and clear to you and to the physician or the office as possible. So thanks for that.
Bruce, it's Julie.
Yes. Yes.
Hello. Hey, are you guys, I can't remember in the discussions if this is going to happen. Are we going to have like a bit of a tutorial where you'll go through the, like an EMR, like look at some of the questions and then show us how we'd actually go through the EMR and pull it up? I'm just thinking maybe the visual, I know for myself, like don't get me wrong, these presentations are great, but sometimes for me, I need the hands-on piece too. Or is the expectation, this may be a question for Aaliyah, is that we'll follow up in the regions with just face-to-face tutorials with our peer mentors for our team?
I think that would be a great topic for one EMR per webinar to sort of go through these things and show you what it looks like actually in the EMR. What we had with the instruction sheets was an attempt to show you screen capture shots with instructions that followed what was on the screen as best as possible. But you're right, it's not like seeing it live, you know, and if we can even create little screen capture videos that you could have to sort of review those points and how you run through things, that would be awesome as well. We run into trouble with some version control and having to update the videos or the screen capture shots as the product updates. But I'll turn that over to Aaliyah to get her comments. Or we won't. Leah,
maybe
are you there?
Mute. I can follow up with Leah afterwards too.
Okay, that would be good.
Sorry, guys.
Okay. Did you have a comment to that, Leah?
Yeah, I think that it would be really great. It's a fantastic idea, and it would be awesome to have like little tip videos that you guys could review whenever you needed to, if you needed like a refresher or something. I do think though that it's something that we need to discuss further, and maybe we need to discuss it with the vendors, maybe we need to discuss it with some of our peer mentors. But I do think that's a really great suggestion, so we'll take it under advisement and see what we can do.
Great. Okay, so next slide, please. And again, you know, if there are other questions or concerns specific to any instruction sheet or any comments about one EMR, you find something doesn't work or it's outdated or it's missing, please email both Aaliyah and I, CC us both, and we'll attend to it and get back to you on it right away. So, moving on, phase 2. We've cleaned up the patient demographics, and now we want to start looking at the chronic disease registries and looking at 5 in particular, and then polypharmacy. So I'm going to just go into a little bit more detail on each and explain what I'm talking about. Next slide. So first is hypertension. And a question for you, and I'll just give you 30 seconds to think about this and jot it down. So if you have a pen and paper, this exercise works better if you can jot it down. I'm not asking you to shout out your answers or anything, but just write it down in here. So the question to you is, how is hypertension identified in the EMR? What ways can you think of that a physician could find out or run a question or a query to determine that a patient has hypertension and produce a list of patients with hypertension? I'll just give you 30 seconds to think about that and write it down. Okay, so in the ideal world, where people are writing a problem in the problem list and actually putting the proper ICD-9 code, you could just run a query, a question, run a report to say, show me all the patients who have a problem in the problem list that's coded with the ICD-9 code for hypertension, which is 401. And what we like to do is, there's variations on 401, so there's 401.0, 401.1, and so forth. So what we say is we run a query looking for an ICD-9 code in the problem list that starts with 401. So next question would be, what if they don't have ICD-9 code 401 in there? We could run a question that says, find me all the list of patients who have a list in the problem list or have an entry in their problem list that is written as text, hypertension. A lot of people don't write it as hypertension in their EMRs. They write HTN. They write a little up arrow with BP, increased BP. They write white coat syndrome. They write malignant hypertension. They write all sorts of things. So it starts becoming a problem, being able to identify something from his name. But you could go through a list of common names or ask the physician, you know, what do you list your patients with hypertension? If you don't code them, how do you enter hypertension into their problem list? And they can tell you generally what they commonly do, many ways of doing it. finally, most exact way really is looking at what the actual numbers are. So any blood pressure that's elevated above a systolic pressure of 140 or a diastolic blood pressure of 90 or both is deemed to be hypertension if that's been recorded at least 2 times and noted, and there's no other reasons for it, like white coat syndrome, where blood pressure goes up just because you're anxious seeing a doctor. So what we've tried to develop for you is a means of going into the EMR and being able to run a question on the patient, list the patients that asks and looks specifically for those things. Tell me all the patients that are listed with an ICD-9 code of 401 or who have hypertension written in a number of different ways or who have an elevated blood pressure, and show me those on the list. And you can compare that with a list of, now show me all the patients that don't have the code but do have the problem in the problem list written in some way, or have patients that have high blood pressures that's been documented in their EMRs. And when you get the list of all the people that have hypertension by those criteria but don't have the code, then, as was earlier mentioned from Tamara, it'd be great to be able to say, here's that list of patients that meet the criteria for hypertension but don't have it coded, and I want to have all those patients have hypertension with the proper code in their problem list, done in one batch all at once. So in several of the EMRs, we've told you how to be able to do that, and we'll work with vendors for other EMRs that can't do that batching feature to be able to apply that. Now, the tricky thing with batching is that if you do batching, when you apply the batch task, like put a problem that has the code 401 in the problem list labeled as hypertension, it does it, boom, to all those patients. And it can't be undone very easily except one at a time. So one of the things to do is make sure that the list that you have that you're working on, that the physician says, yeah, those are definitely all the people. I don't see anybody there that doesn't have hypertension and they're the right list. And if there is somebody, 1 or 2 that we get wrong, I can undo it at a later time. But to undo 100 or 200, more difficult. The final but a little bit trickier way of identifying that a patient should have the problem coded in their problem list but doesn't is by looking at what the physician has billed. Every bill that goes into MSP has, of course, an MSP billing code, like 0100 or 0120, and it also has a diagnostic code. And many physicians are pretty good at putting the right diagnostic code, ICD-9 code, in this case 401, with their billing, but don't code it in their problem list. So you could, in theory, find all the patients who have been billed with the ICD-9 code of 401 who don't have 401 coded in their problem list as hypertension, and show you the list and then batch them. Great, except just be careful. Some people tend to get a bit sloppy with their diagnostic codes that they use in billing MSP. Like, who cares what code I use? I get paid no matter what. So even if somebody is sort of borderline blood pressure, or sometimes their blood pressure is high, or the one time they see them and has to be high, they'll put in 401. And yet the patient doesn't have actual documented hypertension. Or they may have hypertension and they're coding it with something else that is non-standard. And the classic for that is many people will only use 780 codes, and those are just sort of general codes that are unspecified, and really not very useful to us in being able to use it for data. So that's how we would move through hypertension. And I've introduced a lot of concepts there. And before I move into the other ones, which I'll move through a little more quickly because they're pretty much the same concepts, are there any questions with those things that I've mentioned, or have I missed something that you've used as a way of being able to identify patients that aren't coded in their problem list? So I'll just pause and see if there's any questions.
Yep. Hey, Bruce, this is Byron Telehor calling.
Yep. Hi, Byron.
Hey, so I've done the very similar thing for diabetes in the past, and one of the things I've done for diabetes is taking a look at usual meds, because, you know, there are some doctors have some favorites of metformin. They usually start with metformin and then move on to things like Genomid. Are there too many drugs that you would use for hypertension, or could you use that same strategy as well for hypertension?
Well, you could, you know, I think that's a great approach, and I use it specifically for patients who have hypo, low thyroid function, because the thyroid medication is only used for that condition and nothing else. Right. So to your point, yeah, that's the problem. There are, and even in diabetes, metformin is actually used for other conditions where there isn't documented diabetes necessarily. Right. And however, other, like insulin is used for nothing else but diabetes. So you're right. Hypertension, though, is one of those ones where a lot of the antihypertensive medications are used in other conditions like heart failure, like irregular heartbeats and things like that. So you could get that initial list of patients that maybe the physician, though, would have to go into each of those patients and take a look at them or use some other kind of screening.
Right. So less reliable than other.
Less reliable. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So no other questions? Heart failure. So same thing again. Now that you've been sort of given a way of looking at it with an example with hypertension, spend 30 seconds and think, how would I go about identifying that list of patients with heart failure in a physician's EMR? So I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, so if you know off the top of your head the ICD-9 code for heart failure, great. And again, key is when you're running a question, a query, a report, you're looking for the ICD-9 code that starts with 428. And the reason, again, you're doing it with starts with because you want to capture anybody that's just entering 428 or those that enter 428.0, 428.1, which have different interpretations. So that's the easy one. If they've only put the name, people can write in heart failure. They can write in congestive heart failure. They can write in HF. They can write in CHF. All different ways of doing it. So again, ask the physician. As far as tests that show heart failure, there are some investigations, but generally most physicians, I'd say over 90%, do not code or list the investigations particularly well that you could search for them. If you happen to have somebody that has a process in place that every time they get a scan for an echocardiogram or a MIBI scan, M-I-B-I, or a MUGA, M-U-G-A scan, looking at the left ventricular ejection fraction, then you can, great. I mean, you've got an advanced physician who probably is coding things properly anyway, but they can actually search for a result showing that there's an ejection fraction less than 40% for heart failure. There's also blood tests, one called BNP and another one called NT-proBNP. You don't have to know these, but there are blood tests that you can scan for and do that same kind of search, looking for how many patients have this above a certain level, have an investigation showing an ejection fraction less than that certain percent, who don't have the IC9 codes starting with 428 in the problem list, and list those patients. I'm not expecting you to be able to have to do that at this point. I'm just telling you that those are ways of doing things that eventually we may be able to create queries on that you could have to run, and if they're coded properly, be able to find those patients. Again, to Byron's question about medications, there are some medications that are quite common in heart failure, like water pills, diuretics. Again, may not be consistent for only heart failure. Sorry, there's a question out there.
Yeah, it's Julie. So I'm wondering, what's your advice? So I would think, as if I was someone who doesn't have very much experience with the EMR, or very little, I'd probably be kind of freaking out right now listening to you.
Yep.
There's all that's going on. So I'm wondering, like, how we can maybe frame this so that people can, like, you know, it's all right, you know, step off the ledge. We don't need to be on the ledge, because we can figure this out. Because I would think for some, this is probably sounding quite complicated and daunting. So what would your advice be for those who are on that ledge right now and freaking out?
My advice is I give you this information so that you can understand that there are various ways of being able to help the physician find these diseases in their EMRs. What I'm trying to help you to understand is that, and I think Julie's point is great, you don't have to be experts to be a coach. To be a coach, you need to be able to pull information out of the physician. So physicians know this stuff. You don't have to teach them about these things, about what constitutes heart failure, what constitutes other problems. There's going to be some background noise here in a minute. Sorry about that as the plane comes in. All that you need to be able to do is pull this information out of the physicians that know how to run reports. And we're giving you that instruction sheet on how to run a report, and we'll give you the instructions on where you can plunk in information to say, find me that list of people who the physician has listed heart failure in whichever way they commonly do, but haven't coded it. And you'll be able to plunk that information into standard reports and be able to get a list of patients and help work the physician through that. Does that help, Julie, or does that still make it seem daunting?
I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of other people and if I was in their shoes. Because even the questions, for some, it's like, I don't even understand what he's asking us, you know, maybe in some situations. So I'm thinking that maybe this is something where if you're not familiar, it's like going out to a teammate who's quite familiar, or a peer mentor. This would be a great opportunity to have a peer mentor with you. I just, you know, I'm just mindful of just how people may be feeling, and in particular interior team, because this is, you know, this is complicated work for sure. And maybe it's understanding that it's complicated right now, but we'll keep breaking it down into pieces, and so that it doesn't get too overwhelming.
You know, that's exactly that, and what we've talked about, and you know, if there's someone like there's Byron saying, yeah, we search for medications to help find for diabetics. Wow, you know, if someone was to go along with Byron into an office to look at how that was done in a specific EMR, great. Or exactly as you said, Julie, there's peer mentors on, you know, in the interior, getting somebody like, if you're on IntraHealth, getting somebody like Aaron Ewing to be able to go in to the office or walk you through his EMR of how you do that. Or if you're in Nanaimo and then on IntraHealth, connecting with Chris Collins, or, you know, getting a hold of me if you need help with Wolf or Med Access. And those people are out there that can certainly help with that. I would not expect you to go in alone, never having done this before, armed with only an instruction sheet and expected to do this. Go in with help. It's going to take time. And practice, 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 doing it again and again and again. It's going to be important.
Makes total sense. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, Julie, thanks for bringing that up. Diabetes, we're looking for ICD-9 that starts with 250, the code. We're looking for the ways that people are entering in diabetes in their problem list, DM, DM1 or 2, diabetes. Ask the physician, how do you do this? Do you code, and how do you usually enter your diabetics in the problem list? And let's run a search and follow the instruction sheet or get some help to be able to run the search looking for all those patients. As well in diabetes, as Byron mentioned, you could look for certain medications. Physician can help with that. You can actually look for blood results. There's a hemoglobin A1C or a fasting blood sugar. Again, the physician knows the parameters in that. Those that don't know the parameters, there'll be help to be able to have a query that looks specifically for those kinds of things. And again, this will all be made a lot more simple for you when you have a common standard interface, such as what we hope to provide with the Health Data Coalition, that allows you to go in and be able to run these searches from an interface that you're comfortable with and allows you to be able to get a better idea of what the physician is doing and how well they're being able to identify and code their problems. And finally, the other of the big four chronic diseases is COPD. It's got ICD-9 codes that start with 490 to 92, 494, and 496. They have problem list written text that could say anything from emphysema to chronic bronchitis to COPD. Ask the physician. And that's diagnosed by breathing test called spirometry. Not generally coded well and entered well into physician EMRs and identified as spirometry. Some people do it. And that's something around panel management and work that we can do in the future that will help them with that. The really interesting one for folks is going to be more challenging, is going to be around chronic pain. Now, many of you who have done the pain management course know that most physicians don't enter chronic pain as a problem in their problem list until after they've done the pain management course. And there's been some controversy about how that's actually coded in the problem list. It is absolutely 100% guaranteed that MSP will accept the ICD-9 code of 338.4. That is the chronic pain ICD-9 code. Many EMR vendors still yet, after a year, have not entered that code into their standard database, so that the EMR sends up a little bit of a warning message to say, this isn't an accepted code by MSP. It is. So tell the physician you can override it. And developing the registry of all the patients with chronic pain so the physician knows which patients those are is something that we've already been through and have provided you with a handout that helps you walk through a physician's patients to be able to identify those patients that should have chronic pain coded in their problem list. That's a PDF single-page handout that you can get from ALIA or from probably from your lead in your region that I developed over a year ago with the pain management course. And many of you have probably used when you're working with patients with chronic pain. So it's a trickier one. There'll be less physicians prepared for this, but it is probably the one that's the most timely given the college's pressure around having all physicians follow some specific rules of things they must do with patients with chronic pain if they're on opioids. And the college has put a fair bit of pressure on physicians. It's no longer should do, it's must do. So that's why we included it as part of the panel cleanup. The final one, and next slide please, is polypharmacy. We're looking at polypharmacy. You think, well, not everybody's interested in knowing how many medications a patient is on. I'm busy enough doing other things than the patient's on all the right medications. What this helps do is a couple of things. One, it makes sure that the physician is actually entering in all the prescriptions in the EMR and using the EMR for prescribing. Many physicians still use prescription pads and don't use their EMR for prescribing. Also, I'd say a large number of physicians don't record their opioid or narcotic medications that they write on the duplicate prescription pads. They just write them on the duplicate and don't record them in EMR. Encouraging them to do that is absolutely necessary now that the college is watching over this carefully. And then finally, you know, physicians often won't enter in prescriptions that other physicians write. So if a specialist is writing a prescription, there's ways of entering in prescriptions written by others in the EMR to be able to track the prescription. And it's even important to enter in over-the-counter medications or herbal medications in the EMR so that we can understand what medications the patient's actually taken, and ultimately in panel management and working with patients, we're actually working on medication reconciliation and appropriate prescribing. So there's the why of why we do this. The other interesting thing is that many EMRs allow the physician a default way of entering in prescriptions, that the prescription is entered in as a continuous prescription. So even when you're giving an antibiotic for 5 or 7 days, it's entered in as continuous and keeps showing up on the patient's medication list. And learning how to change medication from continuous to just a simple one-time prescription is something that many physicians may not be aware of. And it's part of cleaning up their medication list to make it more appropriate as to understand what the patient is actually on. So again, to Julie's point, whoa, this sounds like a lot. The instructions with the instruction sheets help people walk through some of this in some of the EMRs, and most of this in a couple of the EMRs, and in other EMRs, there's still work that we need to do to help you be able to go in the office and do this. If you're on MOIS, you can use AmCare. You can be talking to the MOIS coaches to help you move through that. If you're on MedAccess and Wolf, there's some very clear instructions to move you through this. Osler, less so, and InterHealth and Oscar, we're in the process of developing a bit more robust tools that will make your job a bit easier. So I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
I saw a few raised hands, so.
Sure, yep.
Hi, Bruce, it's Jen Tongle. I was just wondering about, just going back to what you said regarding the chronic pain ICD-9 code for 338.4. Yes. I had some questions in regards to, I was doing an action period visit, just following up with some physicians, and they were saying that they were coding their, the patient with the chronic pain 338.4 ICD-9 code, but it was being rejected because they also submitted with it the billing code for the mental health visit of 14043. So I'm just wondering, what is your advice to them in means of how they can correct how they submitted that to MSP in means of the ICD-9 code of 338.4 as well as the mental health visit billing code?
Again, you know, as to one of the things with billing, if you have them look at the preamble and the billing descriptions on the SGP website or GPS website, you'll see that 14043 is only to be used with the psychiatric diagnoses, and it has a list very clearly there of the 300, the high 200s and low 300 ICD-9 codes. Chronic pain at this time is not accepted as one of those. That's negotiations that there's been discussions about that with Kathy Cleland and different committees that are working on that. In the meantime, they can still bill the ICD-9 code 338.4, but they need to include a psychiatric code. So usually these patients have depression or anxiety or something associated that would allow them to generate the 14043.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi, Bruce. It's Ronnie. I just have a quick question. Just wondering, when we're going through and identifying patients for the panel and doing the cleanup, are we then asking the physician to go through the list and make sure those are correct patients, so those patients actually have that disease, and properly coding it in the problem summary at that time?
Yes. I mean, that would be the ideal, that people are checking to make sure that what the work that they did or you helped them do or the MOA did is appropriate and accurate. And that's best practice to check that list of patients. If they're very sure, generally I find that people are pretty quick. They run down the list and say, oh yeah, that one definitely has diabetes, no, that one doesn't. It's not that big of an issue as it may sound it is. But doing that check is really probably a good step.
Thank you.
Okay, so next slide, please. So next phase, we'll be looking at a number of other conditions. Now these are going to be less likely to be coded, so we'll have some, hopefully some, to Julie's point, some better instructions, better guides for how we're going to move forward with it. And I don't anticipate this will be something that people will generally be moving to really quickly. I think given what you've been given in the last 2 weeks with what you were given 2 weeks ago and again today, you got enough work to keep you going for quite a while before you start getting into trying to identify frail elderly and other things. But we will be working to help you do this phase of the cleanup and have instructions and other tools to support you in doing that when time comes for this. Next slide, please. And then that allows us, once we do all that panel cleanup, to get into panel management, as I mentioned before, where you're actually working with patients and with physicians, I think, on things that are really relevant to the patient care, not just doing the housekeeping stuff. So this is the real meat of why we do all that other work to get ready to do the panel management work. Next slide. And, there's some examples of some of the things in panel management, as we mentioned before. Things like vaccination, screening, directives, health management goals, and more chronic disease management. Next slide. Again, just sort of, this is a process diagram just showing you the steps taken to move, that we're moving through that we've described. It's not anything other than there are certain steps to get the job where we start, and identifying patients, and we're generating reports, making decisions, and based on those decisions, some actions before the work is done. Next slide. And I'll turn things over to Aaliyah to go through any other material that she wants to cover. So again, thank you very much. I apologize that I do have to run to get ready to catch a flight, but I am available by email, and please CC Aaliyah, or if you're addressing Aaliyah, please CC me with any questions or comments. And, you know, anything that's constructive, from concerns like Julie had to comments like Byron had or Jen had, all welcome. This is a learning process for us all. We don't have all the answers and depend on you to tell us what's actually going on out there. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We really appreciate you preparing and taking the time to run through all of these things with us. As Bruce said, if you have any other questions for him, if you could send them along. And what I'll do is, as the questions come in, we'll collate them all together, and we'll share the questions and the answers out with everybody, because as we all know, chances are if one person asks the question, there's probably 10 others who have the same question. So we'll continue to share that. So what I wanted to do for the last half hour is chat a little bit about any experiences you've had using the first bit of the tool in the last couple weeks, if you've had a chance or if you've started. I know I did hear that there were a couple, at least, coordinators or coaches who were going to go out there and give it a try. And the other thing, too, is chatting about sort of any approaches you might want to use. So I do have a couple of case studies that we can talk about as well. Yeah, so maybe I'll just open it up. Anybody?
Hi, good morning. It's Catherine calling from Fraser. I do have a couple of questions, but I also recognize that we're not able to access the webinar from August 4th. So some of the questions I have may be addressed when that becomes available. But it was, my couple of questions are, yes, would love to hear from folks who have used the tool. The tool looks great at first glance. And I'm wondering about, will there be a tab in the tool to record GP and MOA hours? Are we tracking that? So I have more logistical questions at this point.
Okay, we don't have a tab in the tool for hours, but maybe that's something that we could add. It is something that we would like to track and keep an eye on, especially as we're compensating them around it as well. And that compensation right now is very much a test, and so we're not really sure if it's too much, if it's not enough, and how we should potentially change it when we roll it out to the broader GP population.
It would be great if it was within the tool, because then we're managing both the hours and the information, like it's all in one. And just from a management side, it would be beneficial to have it that way.
Yeah,
I agree. And just two other quick points, and then I'll shut up. The total active patients, I'm wondering, I've gone through the tool, and I'm wondering, is that the number? I seem to feel that would we not be entering that total number of active patients when the query was run with the physician and or MOA, and because it looks like we would have to calculate that percentage in those prevalence categories for the chronic disease. And then I also just wondered about scoring. It does not appear there's any scoring, but I thought it alluded somewhere to scoring. So those are my questions. Thanks.
Okay, so total number of active patients. Oh, yeah, so pre-cleanup and post-cleanup response score. Sorry, you can ignore these little comment fields. I can get rid of them. So if anybody knows in Excel how to get rid of these, please let me know, because the usual method doesn't work. Okay, so we would want to enter the total number of active patients in there. And then the prevalence.
Sorry, not to interrupt. The responses are the yes, no, unsure. That little bubble is the tip kind of popping up. So you have to hit the little arrow to actually get the response, which are yes, no, and unsure, which is great. So I thought to myself, if I was using it, I would maybe put the total active patients in the assessment note along that question line. Because when you go further and you have to start determining what is the percentage, you'd have to divide the number of hypertensive 40 into the total active patients to get that percentage. There's no formula in there.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, Catherine. I understand what you're saying. I think that, so when we talked about this with Bruce, he expected that we would be able to pull both the percent and the list, like the number of, for example, patients with hypertension from the EMR. So I think IntraHealth is one where it doesn't do percentage.
Okay. They will typically spit out a number in any of the EMRs on a query, but the dashboards were pulling a percentage as well. So maybe in some EMRs it will give us a percentage, but most of the queries spit out a flat number, a total of that list.
Yeah, okay. So I think maybe you're right. It would be better to change the drop-downs on active patients.
Perhaps.
So that you're just entering the number, and then we can add a formula in to calculate percent that if the dashboard pulls a percent for you or the query pulls a percent for you, you can just overwrite the calculation.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks.
All right. We will do that. Any other questions or comments about the tool, maybe things that we should change on the tool itself? Maybe I should have a look at the chat. Okay, so Nancy was asking where the tool is. Once we make the updates to this one that we just talked about, I'll send out a new one. I'm not sure that we want to hold it on the website for you guys, so I'll send it out again. Erin asked, certain divisions are able to have 5 GPs take part. Which division does that include? So that does include all divisions, but we do want to specifically target to start those divisions or communities who have been identified as proof of concept communities. So in the case of Fraser, that's Fraser Northwest and Mission. In Vancouver, it's Vancouver West End and North Shore. Interior is Kamloops and Kelowna, if I remember correctly. Island is Victoria and Oceanside. And the north is pretty much everybody. But that being said, those are the highest priority proof of concept communities. There are a number of other communities who are included and have raised their hands that they want to start moving towards the patient medical home, which is why we open it up to all divisions. Keeping in mind that maybe there are some who are considered proof of concept who actually aren't quite ready to start doing this work, but there may be physicians in those communities who have raised their hands and reached out to you or are interested in doing this, and we can still start that work with those physicians. So also, what communication has gone out to divisions around this work, the rollout, and timelines? That is also a great question, and it's something that has come up a lot. One of the things is, so we have shared, the last thing I shared, I think, was what went out the middle of July, which was a communication around PSP's priorities. So one of those slides at the beginning of this one at the beginning of the presentation. So these directions and our priorities around the QI small group learning sessions, panel assessment and management, those were shared with divisions in the middle of July. We also have a communication that's coming out that goes into more detail around the timelines and explains a little bit about these tools that we're developing, the new small group learning session topics, and that sort of thing. The problem is, and I'm going to be totally candid with you, there hasn't been any communication directly from GPSC about the patient medical home to divisions or physicians across the province since April. And we are a little bit hamstrung by that right now because there have been conversations happening out with divisions between the ministry and the ministry with the health authorities. So we expect GPSC to send something out from the co-chairs either tomorrow or early next week, and we are going to send the communication around the timelines pretty much immediately thereafter. So that will go to divisions. I will share it all with you first so that you're all aware, so that you don't get calls from your divisions or physicians saying, what's this, what's happening, what's going on? But we are a bit stuck. And unfortunately, it puts you guys in a hard place. It puts us centrally in a bit of a hard place trying to manage expectations with divisions who have been having discussions with Stephen Brown and the ministry. So, Erin, I hope that answers your question. Do we have anybody else? Slides will come out right after this webinar. We'll also share the recording as well. Do we have an ETA for when InterHealth and Oscar may be ready? I don't. I will double check with Bruce, and Kelsey Gallant has been coordinating with the vendors on these things. So she's on holidays this week, but I will send her a note and ask her to check as soon as she's back next week. Okay. Any other questions?
It's Esther. I'm just wondering, is there any communication with the vendors on the messaging that you're providing for divisions? The reason I ask is I did contact a practice where the office or the clinic owner has in fact been very involved with training, and I emailed his clinic manager to say that PSP has provided us with some templates for ensuring that patient panels are accurate, and I'd love to come and try them out in your office. And while I was off sick for 3 days, I came back to a rather alarmed email from the clinic owner saying, what is this about? And basically saying, you're not to come to the clinic until this is clarified. And I was stunned at the response. So I'm very hesitant to move forward.
Hi, Esther. This is Jenny. I do know, to answer the first part of your question, that we've been in touch with the vendors, and actually the vendors have been, looking at the cheat sheets, and there's lots of discussion and an ongoing relationship with them. As far as, addressing your concern or with the clinic owner, maybe we can take that offline and kind of figure out what's going on there and talk more about it. But we will also send that same communication that goes out to divisions to the vendors as they're a very important partner in this, and they know, you know, at this point, a lot of the same information you guys know as far as the development of this 4-part tool and some of the topics for small group learning sessions, and they also are continuing to do the EMR enabling work with the modules too. So we'll be sure to share that communication and with the vendors, but maybe we can talk offline about the other issue.
That would be great, because I don't want this to taint any of the relationships that I worked hard to develop with physicians. And if there's another way that I ought to have gone about this, I do really want to know it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe we can talk later today.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I have some time later today as well, so we can. Sounds good. Yeah, I'm sorry that's how that went, Esther. That's really difficult.
Well, I think it just reiterates the importance that, and Bruce did advise us in his first, or maybe it was Aaliyah, on the importance of the why, and I believe that that's my first mistake. I didn't clearly reiterate the why. I think it was because I thought, being that they're such a progressive clinic, that they were more informed. So I'm sharing my mishap so others know how important it is to set the context.
Yeah, no, thank you, Esther. And we'll definitely chat about that more later today, if you have time. Okay, I had a couple more questions in the chat. So around timelines, do I specifically mean each tool under development and SGLS timelines as well? Yes, I do. So sort of it's around the rollout of each of the tools and when we estimate we'll have completed training through these learning labs. And then also the SGLS will be when the content is ready and when we estimate training as well. What types of responses have we had from divisions when the communications to date have gone out? What responses have GP and MOAs had in terms of participation and the time involved? That's a great question, Shafali. What divisions have been, I think, more responsive and have read and heard our communication more when it comes directly from Alana to them in a more informal manner than to the formal GPSC co-chairs communications. So we're trying to move to an even smaller small c communications where it's a little more informal and directly to the EDs. I haven't heard anything myself from GPs and MOAs around participation or time. So, yeah. Okay, Catherine. Sounds like we'll be doing a reassessment. Do we have any sense of timelines from those who have done assessments? So how long is it taking to do the work or cleanup? No, that is definitely one of the things that we would like to learn more about as we start to go forward. If anybody else would like to chime in and when they've done other assessments, so maybe, I don't know if it's part of those of you who were part of PEDO and how long it took to do some of the work with that, or coordinators in VCH, you guys are working with the EMR functionality that you had put together previously, which is the next tool that we're going to train on. If, like, how much time the work with that is taking, so we might get an estimate.
Hi, it's Ronnie. For the EMR functionality tool, you get faster as you go along, but to start, you probably need to go through just asking the questions and getting comfortable. You probably need about 30 minutes, I'd say.
Okay.
It's Catherine. Thanks, Ronnie. Just to get a sense, are they running the queries with you there with them? Is that happening concurrently as you go through the assessment?
For me, Catherine?
Yes, if you've done any of this targeted work. Obviously, I know lots about the other assessments we did at Keto, but this targeted panel assessment, yeah.
I haven't done the targeted panel assessment work going through that tool. I'm just speaking to the EMR functionality tool.
Oh, I see. I just wondered if anyone, yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of what this work actually looks like in the clinic. So if someone's using this panel assessment tool, is the physician and MOA running these queries live with them, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think anyone in Vancouver is actually using the Excel tool yet.
Okay.
Has anybody used any portion of this tool yet, or have we all been just sort of waiting and not totally clear on how to go about it? Because that's okay.
It's Candace from PCH.
Hey,
on the North Shore divisions, we're doing a project called Complex Care Management, and it's really similar to this, where we pull out all the chronic disease management patients, so starting with CDM and diabetes, hypertension, congestive heart failure, finding the patients through various methods and recording the numbers at the baseline, midpoint, and at the end to see if we've increased data accuracy, if we've been able to bill all the incentive fees possible, if we've got a recall for proactive care for next time patients are due for a treatment or a lab or things like that. And so we've done a lot of tracking with how long it takes the physicians and or the MOAs to clean up their panel. So we have a lot of information surrounding that. It's very similar work. It's not this tool per se, but pretty similar. And it takes generally anywhere from 5 hours to 20 hours to do all that work, so far as we hear in our cohorts.
I guess it's going to depend really on how clean their panel is to start with too, right?
Yeah, because some of them, they're just tweaking it and finding those that may not have already had it on the problem summary, but for the most part are good, right down to people who have not put anything on the problem summary at all and hadn't figured out that was a really useful thing to do. So starting with looking in the billing and in the labs and in medications. And so it's very dependent on what their current situation is as to how much time it takes them. And although really received well, it's a really positive project that we've done a couple of wrap-up events, and all the participants felt that it was of great value, which is good. So I think that when people start going out with this tool, it may be daunting to start for the physicians when they see potentially what a mess they have in their data. But at the end state, I think they all really appreciate the value proposition, and it's been really, really positive.
That's great to hear. And I think too, like, I know that this tool is a lot. It's a lot to go through. It's potentially a lot of cleanup with the GPs and the MOAs. And so thinking about the approach, particularly if it's a clinic that you know is maybe struggling with their EMR a little bit, not even going through, you don't need to run through the whole entire tool in one sitting either. Just starting with the first few items, and even the rest of the primary panel indicators that we talked about today, the hypertension and the diabetes and polypharmacy and all of that stuff, if, breaking it down into smaller pieces where maybe you go in and you just do hypertension and I can't remember what was next, but, do two per visit and then they work on those for a little while. I think it's potentially going to take quite a bit of time depending on what they look like. And this is my suggestion, but I'm not out there. I'm not in a clinic sitting beside a GP or an MOA. So I totally leave it up to, you guys know better than I do how you would best approach this with a GP, particularly one who is struggling with their EMR.
So Christina, hi, it's Jen Tongol. I just wanted to mention that I do agree with what we've been talking about in means of the time period. Like Ronnie had said 30 minutes for the actual EMR functionality, but Catherine was actually asking about the panel assessment tool. So just glancing at the panel assessment tool on the Excel sheet there that you had shown earlier, it looks like it's actually taken each type of module that we're currently doing, and that's what we're doing at PCH right now, is that when we do a pre-AP visit, we're actually going in and doing separate panel cleanup sessions with creating their registries. So we have gone in and done the coaching in means of like chronic pain, for example. We'll go in and we'll make sure that, their registry is cleaned up in means of their chronic pain patients all are coded with 338.4. And then with the COPD ones, there'd be 490 to 492, for example, for their ICD-9 codes. And so we would query with them. And it would take just to give an answer to what Catherine had asked earlier, in means of how long it would take. So for the COPD one, when you're going in and doing the queries with the physicians to clean up their panel for COPD patients, it would take me about 20 minutes initially to create the query for that clinic. And then if that clinic had like the shared database with those other physicians in that same AP visit, say I was doing a group of AP with the same physicians in the clinic, let's say 5 physicians in one clinic, then once you created that query for the one physician, you can just copy and paste it and make it for the other physicians depending on what their physician code is in the EMR. So it would take about 20 minutes to prep the actual query for me, and then when I had that one query, I could just change it, and within 5 minutes, I could do the next AP or pre-AP visit with a panel cleanup for that COPD participant of that module for those GPs in the same clinic. So it could range, like if you have 5 physicians in one clinic, then it could range up to maybe half an hour for you to actually finish up doing the panel cleanup for your COPD patients alone. So that's like one row in your panel assessment tool, right? So if you gather up all those different types of queries that you're creating throughout the panel assessment in your Excel sheet, that will add up to more than just half an hour. But it is something that I think that we can work on individually, like you said, Christina, because we are currently doing that in Vancouver. We're actually taking registries and making sure that their panel is clean for that specific module and that topic.
That's great, Jen. And the thing I was thinking too, so is Aaliyah, by the way.
Yeah.
Is it I don't have a lot of experience with EMRs. I'm, totally fine with that. So is that in, which EMR is that in, and does that time vary from EMR to EMR, and depending on where you can pull something out of, the old ODD or something like that?
Definitely. It will definitely depend on the experience that you have with that EMR and with how, I would say, with how much of a super user that physician is with that EMR. So in means of the technicality, most of the queries I created were in intra-health profile EMRs, but then I also created queries with Oscar. So Oscar, you can also create a query in basically a code and then code it in, and then you could copy and paste it for different ICD-9 codes. So I think I passed on those cheat sheets that I created to you as well as Bruce. And yeah, so it's just kind of a sample of what I went through for COPD and chronic pain. And then we did some enrichment for Oscar as well for neighborhood network. So it's something that we had worked with the divisions with.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great, Jen, and thank you for passing those along too. We did update. I think you had sent the updates around IntraHealth after the last webinar, and I know Bruce took a look at those and incorporated them. It's just one of the ones that we're unfortunately not able to share yet. And I think too, am I right in understanding that I think OSCAR and IntraHealth are two of the more complicated and more difficult ones to work with?
Correct, yeah. You definitely need some type of programming background to do more of the OSCAR work, but I do find that a lot of the OSCAR GPs, a lot of the physicians on OSCAR will be more tech-savvy and means that they're more familiar with the navigation of the tool. The harder portion with what we had found with the past set of physicians that we had worked with that are on OSCAR were that the locums were just having trouble navigating, so we had created locum cheat sheets as well. But with the actual OSCAR EMR and IntraHealth, it is more of like Bruce had mentioned, that it was more of a SQL database type query that you have to create. And yeah, so it just depends on your familiarity with the technicality of each EMR. Is a bit different with Wolf, because with Wolf, you have the actual problem condition and you actually just have to pick out, like, for example, if they have smoking as their history, then you can actually query all smoking patients and then use those for your COPD patient panel. So it's a bit different depending on which EMR you're using.
Okay, that's great, Jen, thanks. And so the thing is too, guys, as Bruce and Julie were talking about earlier, don't get overwhelmed, don't get, you're not on the edge of the cliff, you're not going to, go tumbling over. Definitely take advantage of each other and the skills that, the different skills that you have within your teams. Reach out to your peer mentors and your MOA peer mentors, because they're going to be, a great help to you as well. Reach out to Bruce and to me and to your leads, because this is such a different and new space that we're stepping into, and we need to support each other as we move forward with it. We are out of time, so our next one is 2 weeks from today, which is September 1st. I can't believe it's going to be September 1st. So if you have any other questions or anything, please don't hesitate to shoot me. It's via an email, or shoot an email to Bruce. And yeah, we'll share the recording for this, the slides, and we're going to make those updates to the tool and share those as well after the meeting. Typically, the recording takes a day or so to come up on WebEx, so hopefully we'll be able to share that within the next couple of days. And if you have any other questions, I'll be sure to share a summary of those with the answers as well. So thanks very much, guys. Good luck, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.